Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe. Here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And today we're going to be discussing the first little bit of the Flight of the Noldor. This is a brief chapter, but has a lot that goes down. And like all very important chapters, there's no way we can neglect the slightest of details. So here we go. Yavanna reports that the last of the light of the trees lives on in the Silmarils of Fëanor. Tries to suck up to him, saying he was very far-sighted. Then she ends up asking, so can I smash them? And you have everyone like, well, come on, Fëanor, aren't you ready to smash your prized creation? And you've got Ale going, now hold on, guys, that's a little hasty. This is essentially the Mona Lisa to Da Vinci.
It's sacrilegious to ask an artist
to do this. But here's the thing, it's necessary for the world. Fëanor, though, kind of doesn't see it that way. And Fëanor goes on to blame the Valar for the death of Finwë. He's thinking that had he been there, he could have fought off Melkor. In a later chapter, we see how good a warrior Fëanor is. He's actually terrible. So, actually, he would have just been smashed to pulp faster than Finwë. And I know Fëanor's got his defenders who will say he was a great fighter. No, he was actually kind of garbage. The thing is, we know from other elves of his generation that there are some amazing fighters. He's not one of them. He's also a terrible general. The thing about Fëanor was he was the most brilliant of all the elves. No denying that. But martial feats and accomplishments were not his forte. Basically, he was an artiste, not a soldier or a warrior. The warrior in general in the family was his younger brother Fingolfin, and even Finarfin, not Fëanor. It is Fëanor who also curses Melkor, naming him Morgoth, the black foe of the world. And after this, the naming of Melkor as Morgoth serves to start to diminish Morgoth's power to an extent. Meanwhile, Morgoth has kind of escaped the pursuit of the Valar and comes into the wastes of Ahriman. And, well, he's crossed the Helgaraxë, and by this point he's starting to get trapped inside his physical form that he loves ever so much. Drawing near the ruins of Angband, Ungoliant kind of start to squabble over the spoils of war. She wants to satiate her hunger because, well, she's gone a whole 5 seconds without eating. Morgoth's not exactly keen to see her devour their prizes because the trees were not able to slacken her gluttonous nature. She is given all the jewels of Formenos until there's only the Silmarils left, which Morgoth holds in his right hand, and his hand gets burnt badly at this point. And Ungoliant turns on him, attacks, and even bites into him, causing him immense pain, and he screams and screams and screams until the Balrogs, those fiery spirits of darkness that were once Maiar and that descended down into Middle-earth alongside Morgoth, come to his rescue and chase her off. And she ends up running off until she eventually just devours herself. But not before she's had a lot of babies that will haunt Middle-earth in the future for a long, long time. So we've got this great clash between what are essentially two titans of darkness.
Greed and gluttony.
Yeah, that's a very apt way of putting it. I hadn't quite thought of Melkor as being greed here, but very apt. He has his own gluttonous side, nothing compared to her. Ungoliant typically should not have been as strong as Morgoth, given that before she descended she was a Maiar and he was a Valar. But some Maiar are as powerful as the Valar, and some Valar are almost as weak as some of the Maiar. You don't achieve Valarhood by virtue of, in terms of raw power, because Arian, the sun goddess of sorts, is as powerful as, if not more so, than some of the Valar. And she's just a Maiar. In turn, Sauron was very, very powerful, and he was a Maiar. Because I know there's going to be someone who's going to go into the comment section and go, Ungoliant was not a Maiar. How dare you? She's not that weak. No, we're not saying she's weak by any stretch of the imagination. Just that the text states she's a Maiar. And that, well, if the text says something, that generally makes it canon. Generally, not always. But in this case, I'd argue it kind of does. Well, and of course, there's going to be someone who's going to want to revert back to History of Middle-earth. We're going by the published Silmarillion, not the 50 different editions of History of Middle-earth. Now, I like the History of Middle-earth a lot, especially the Lay of Leithian, but the trouble is that it's not in the published Silmarillion. for the most part. We'll get to that at a later date. But for now, I like the fact that darkness turns in and on itself. Later, Dragonlance would kind of adopt this, and even Conan kind of had some of these themes, is that evil always devours itself. It always destroys itself. And in this case, the two main villains started infighting in a struggle to the death. And in a way, it was a struggle to the death, and Ungoliant did die, because she ran off south and died. Whereas Morgoth goes on to live to kill another day. And I do mean kill. He's got a huge body count. Arguably, there's no fantasy character that has his level of body count, except maybe Takhisis can almost measure up, but not White. This is a battle between, I suppose, greed and gluttony, and Morgoth, in the end, wins, but in some ways, in later parts of the story, he starts to adopt unto himself aspects of gluttony as part of his character. That's where it gets a little interesting, because he kind of starts to behave in minor ways, rather like Ungoliant. Lashes out at just about everyone, behaves very childishly, rather like her. She, on the other hand, was frightened off by the Balrogs, whom, if Morgoth was still in his Melkor identity, he'd probably be more powerful than her. Most of his power is seeped into his Balrogs. He did have to give a bit of himself into each of them. So it's interesting that Gothmog, the leader of the Balrogs, and the other Balrogs were able to fend her off the way they were, because that just goes to show that, given that they were powerful enough to chase her away, even an empowered Ungoliant was not a match for Melkor as he traditionally was. Which does lead me to think that he corrupted Ungoliant as well. It's just back in the day before they descended onto Middle-earth. It's just she kind of grew too much for him to handle in his Morgoth form. As for the heroes, they are unable to come to an agreement. And I am kind of loosely slating Fëanor onto their side. For now, he's kind of on their side. And so you get this dissension on both sides, this chaos, this inability to communicate, and just generally bickering endlessly, so that what the Valar have built is gone. They can't seem to build it back. Morgoth could have built with Ungoliant is gone. The thing is, both alliances are over. Both sides are starting on a bit of the back footing. The difference is Morgoth has time to prepare after this, and he is not one to waste his time idly. He's not the Valar. They waste their times idly. They waste some time trying to convince the Noldor not to go ahead. But what was your thoughts on the whole theme of evil just falls in on itself? That in some ways, even the heroic side, or semi-heroic side in Fëanor's case, the Valar and the elves are unable to sympathize with each other, like over the loss of Finwë, and are unable to even come up with a cohesive strategy or even idea that they can all agree on. We'll start with the Melkor Ungoliant.
I find it kind of figures, because evil, as you mentioned, turns on itself because they can't create. Understanding with others is a foreign concept. They might be able to manipulate others, but to truly understand each other?
Yeah. And as for the Valar in Fëanor, how they could not communicate a single thing.
There were egos that clashed because something very traumatic happened in Finwë's death. People weren't thinking.
Yeah.
Some might have wanted a more logical recourse,
such as Tolkien or even Manwë to an extent.
However, Fëanor was so focused on his grief that he wasn't thinking. It's why when someone is in grief or very emotional, it's a bad time to make decisions.
Now we get to the last part of this video. Morgoth sets the Silmarils into his iron crown, which will burn his forehead forever. The important thing to his mind is that they are now truly his. The violation of the Silmarils, I'd use the R word, but like Tolkien once did, but I can't because YouTube. But the violation of the Silmarils is now complete. On the other hand, I do wonder if maybe some of that dark essence of Morgoth's seeping into the Silmarils already. But that's just an errant thought on my part.
And that is horrendous. Yavanna put so much love in those trees.
Yeah, that part is tragic. Those were her Silmarils. And so I understand why she's crying and she's kind of wanting them back, but Fëanor does have a selfish side here.
Yavanna wants them back, but she wants them back in an intelligent method. She doesn't want to go rush in with emotion. She's emotional over this.
She does know what the solution is. The trouble is, everyone else is reacting emotionally for the most part, even to an extent Tolkien and Manwë, and even her. But They already know what needs to be done. The trouble is, Feanor can't bring himself to accept it. Morgoth doesn't just set the Silmarils into his crown. He also, now that I think about it, he sets about reconstructing Angband into Thangorodrim with its 3 great peaks. So now he's got an even fiercer fortress than before. As to the Valar, they sit in the circle of doom to talk about the problem, long into the twilight. So this is where I get where Feanor's coming from. He's basically saying, okay, I don't want to destroy my pretty shiny rocks, but how are we going to fight Morgoth? No, we better talk about this and talk about our feelings on this matter.
Initially, my mentality was, okay, so the Valar are saying we can't just approach this impulsively. Okay, good, they want to think. But the problem is they're going to take too long.
This part ends with Feanor marching off as the Maiar and the Vanyar are crying. Feanor decides now is not the time for tears, but rather for hot-tempered words and action. And next time, we'll get into his speech, which is one of the most brilliant speeches ever written in literature. And I honestly got a lot of vibes of Cicero when I first read it. And you truly get that kind of vibe. I would argue the Rome series by HBO references this speech at one point in a way when Augustus cries out to the Senate, to the conscript fathers, that Marcus Antonius is no longer a Roman, but an Egyptian. And what is left for us to do but fight him? Fight him and destroy him, which the amount of passion Simon Woods put into that speech and the way they shot it and they have him belt it out and scream it out to the conscript fathers, I just found it reminiscent when I read the Silmarillion that these 2 speeches are very similar in a way. We'll get on with the actual analysis next time. So until then, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Morgoth trying to smash Feanor's little brother Fingolfin into itty-bitty pieces.